Ashes of Creation, once heralded as the last bastion of hope for the MMO genre, has seen a strong reputational shift since its 2017 Kickstarter caught the community by storm. They came out swinging, claiming they'd put the massive back into massively multiplayer, which appealed to an audience witnessing the slow demise of their once loved genre. But a game many called an upcoming success story a decade ago is now openly called a scam by many of those prior advocates. In my last video alone, the vast majority of comments reflected that, calling the game outdated slop, lifeless, and dead on arrival, with a strong disdain for how the project had been handled to date, which seems to be the case among many other YouTube comment sections. After 150 hours in Ashes Early Access, I've taken on every boss I can find, spent hours harvesting fields of daffodils, travelled far across diverse biomes, and made some fruit salad. I'll include chapter markers below so you can skip ahead if you simply want to know how playable Ashes is today, but let's answer the broader question. Is Ashes of Creation a scam, or simply a game waiting to achieve its promised success? To start, I need to mention we're reviewing an in-development product here. This game is in alpha testing, which has become a rallying cry for those defending the game's state. If I don't touch on this, I may as well set the comments on fire. If you look at the Steam page, you'll see very clearly that the devs have marketed this as an alpha, and have stated that you are testing this title, not necessarily playing it, which is the same message we saw when Alpha 2 opened up to the public in November 2024. Now I'll touch on the monetization of this game later, but first, what does the alpha look like, has it progressed, and how buggy is it? Ashes' Steam release brought with it a host of improvements to the game. Yes, there are absolutely bugs, server instability, and missing features, but I'll say I personally haven't hit a bug that caused me to lose any significant progress, but that has happened to others. Most of the people I've played with have had a decent experience, with expected bugs popping up, but nothing that impacted their experience. If you're watching this video curious about whether to buy Ashes for its playable gaming experience though, I'd suggest holding off. As someone who has played through the previous 3 alpha phases before Steam Early Access, I can say the game has been improving, and has come a long way, but it's got a long way to go. For reference, when I first picked up Ashes, the anvils and turquoise sea biomes weren't present, there was almost zero onboarding or questing options, crafting was much worse, points of interest were sparse, enemy AI was all over the place, and neither the rogue or summoner were playable. All of that is now implemented, although onboarding and questing remains minimal and cuts off around level 8 or 10 with little direction on what's available to you outside of talking to endless NPCs waiting to find new information. But it's seen improvement with more to come. To give credit where credit's due, the world has expanded significantly. Areas feel diverse with their own unique enemies, unique materials, and in my view, each looks stunning in their own right, keeping in mind lighting and environments aren't final. Crafting and the in-world economy has seen a massive overhaul, and upgrades to settlements had them feeling much more alive this time round. Players can have their own market stalls, albeit access through a single NPC, and it's always nice to see settlements get developed over time based on player choices and actions. There are less bugs, better performance, more features, and a new class that all arrived with December's release. I gave some initial impressions in my last video if you're looking for a little more detail, which I'll link in the description. But to sum it up, combat in Ashes is fantastic and remains the highlight of the experience to date. Classes all have unique roles and identities in party play, abilities are flashy, purposeful, and playing with groups, it was often evident when someone wasn't pulling their weight, whether it was a cleric struggling to heal the group, a bard struggling to keep buffs up, a tank struggling to maintain threat, or DPS just failing to DPS. When it's going wrong, it's rough of course, but when you find a party that is in tune with one another, the experience shines. Crafting feels impactful as well, and I was often checking the marketplace for consumables to purchase and items other players had crafted to give me a leg up or to sell my own. Ashes of Creation is a sandbox MMO. That is an MMO that provides systems to engage in and relies on players developing their own stories, creating their own friction or alliances in the world based on their choices. This is coming along, but is not terribly functional and very time dependent. If you're not able to get online for these events, you miss them, which is the risk of a sandbox experience. Ashes aims for a shifting world based on player behavior, but this type of engagement is few and far between unless you are the type of gamer to commit to daily play, with much left to be implemented. I think of my guild engaging in cheeky antics, like encouraging a trader to bring materials from one settlement to another, and then ganking them along the way. It's up to players to create the content, which is both freeing and open to interpretation on whether that's enjoyable to you. The guild I joined would often kit out tanks as high priority roles in party play to entice players to join, and improve our farming output. We'd set up regular goals for crafting materials or recipes and had a clear objective in mind, but that required me to link in with them regularly out of game to achieve this. When I step back and look at how I spent my 150 hours, about 70 to 80% of that was spent sitting in groups at various XP or gear farming locations throughout the world, simply waiting to level up or waiting for an item or material drop. That generally involved me sitting almost always in a single spot in a room, throwing DPS at a mob my tank had pulled over to the group. Whether it was a point of interest or a dungeon, it's the same function. Now, other players will have devoted more time to gathering and crafting, so you do have options, but the reality is, with points of interest, dungeons, and raid locations being open to the world, each location ended up being carved into small grind spots, so you can rarely move through them with a single group to experience what's on offer. Seal Bloom, for example, has the upper farming location where people farm emblems, a valuable drop, while others farm the bears at the bottom for XP. When you travel to a point of interest, you largely see individual groups killing the same enemies on respawn as they try to push out others for the best spot. This did create some interesting player friction. At one point I was farming Seal Bloom bears with a party and another tried to strong arm us out of the way. They PvP flagged, we responded, and had a great skirmish which we won. But in 150 hours, that only occurred once. Because PvP at this time has so many drawbacks if you get corrupted, which will result in a loss of equipped items, but that will be tweaked in the future. To sum it up, while Ash's world is expanding, there remains very little to do, but of course we are in alpha. More is to come in time, and a lot of this comes down to whether you prefer sandbox or theme park MMOs. Ash's currently has a level cap of 25, the plan as I understand it is 50, we also have our classes, but archetypes are yet to come, which is a massive part of the game and class building. There's much that is yet to be implemented, so when I say there is little to do now, that isn't to say that won't change. I did enjoy my time in the game as someone that enjoys grinding levels, gear, and materials, but if you prefer questing or dungeon runs that don't involve setting up camp for one mob spawn, you're generally going to be out of luck. We also saw the introduction of the Harbinger's story arc, but this has been a letdown to many players I've spoken with who expected a grander experience behind this, with many commenting that it's not worth the time, and they prefer to engage in other content. It's a concern when your flagship story arc isn't getting much attention. I said in my initial thoughts on Harbingers that nailing their first story arc would show what Ashes has to offer, and it's unfortunate that there hasn't been large impact from this release, but I expect that to continue to improve. So let's talk monetization, how the project has been handled to date, and why public perception is souring. As mentioned, Ashes was kickstarted using crowd funds, and there has been additional investment from CEO Stephen Sharif, who's discussed this being a passion project. Now, the main concerns I've seen raised are the amount of time it is taking to complete this title, missed deadlines, perception that marketing doesn't meet reality, studio communication, and of course, the decision to charge for alpha testing in 2024 and then release in early access in 2025, again with a cost. So let's touch on the money and funding. In a 2017 PC Gamer article, Stephen is quoted as saying, "The entirety of the budget comes from my personal funding." And it is here that I think we begin to find the origins of community complaints that Ashes is a scam. Crowdfunding a game comes with the added risk that you have not only promised an experience to a community, but you have taken their money to do so. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a big fan of supporting projects you believe in, but this does create an emotional connection to the project, it creates buy-in, which in many cases is the goal alongside the funding aspect. When you engage a community in this way, you set expectations, and to each individual they may be different. The first is how the money will be used. When players fund a Kickstarter and then see interviews where Stephen is quoted as saying, "Kickstarter is a very small supplemental source to increase the scope of our project and hire additional personnel," followed by that other quote, "The entirety of the budget comes from my personal funding," they're rightly going to be confused when they see alpha keys for sale at $100 and then a year later for $50, much lower than many Kickstarter backer options. If you were fully funded in 2017, what happened? And when there is no public answer to that question, well, why wouldn't you assume you'd been swindled? When charging for alpha keys in 2024, the studio is quoted as saying, "The cost behind alpha 2 access accounts for realm and CDN costs associated with a live service product." CDN, for context, means Content Delivery Network. They're saying here they're charging to cover the costs of providing the alpha service, which Stephen has recently said costs them $800,000 a week. I come back to what I said earlier about player expectations and emotional buy-in. If I see a company saying they're fully funded, I expect that includes the process of building the game, including testing. After all, it has been the studio's choice to open these alpha servers 24/7 and take on that ongoing cost. Now, 7 years is a long time between those quotes. A lot changes, but what hasn't been seen is any clear communication from Steven or Intrepid on what changed. And without that communication, players develop their own narratives, because what other option do they have? Intrepid Studios is an interesting character in that they are quite transparent about some aspects of the game. They communicate frequently about what they're building, what they're working on in monthly dev streams, but rarely engage in discussions on their plans, like charging for early access before slapping it down on the community. To be fair, I don't really expect any company to discuss financial decisions with the community, but then again, when you're taking money from the community, when you communicate regularly on some aspects, and then suddenly the community is hit with something unexpected like charging for alpha access, you are going to see backlash. I'd be surprised if Intrepid didn't expect it, especially when Steven will make those quotes to journalists or tell the community about the $800,000 upkeep costs. Open communication like this can create confusion, creates expectation, and I believe Intrepid's biggest challenge is now in managing those expectations. To me, it feels like they're saying they need cash flow, without specifically saying it for fear it may worry the community. But the messaging seems clear, but again, that is my interpretation of these messages and this information. Add to that features being announced for release and then missing deadlines repeatedly, you can begin to see why some players have soured on this. After all, fool me once and all that. Missed deadlines, changing expectations on funding, a fully functional cash shop in alpha testing, it all starts to look a bit fishy. I do actually want to touch on that further. I don't think there's been enough backlash on the fact many backers are waiting for their cosmetics and other items, while Intrepid are selling cosmetics to players in an alpha, which is itself a contradiction and further poor communication. You can't tell me I'm testing services and shouldn't expect to play a game, and then sell me cosmetics for said game. Well, I guess you can because they're doing it. Further, the Steam release was quite surprising to many. The game is in alpha. Releasing on Steam to many gamers, many casual gamers, will come across as a release. You're no longer using your own client and website. You've now established yourself in an online gaming marketplace where expectations are higher. And this brings me to my conclusion on this piece. Let's answer the question I started with: is Ashes of Creation a scam? Bluntly and by definition, no. At least, not by the strict definition of the word. Intrepid are very clearly working on this product. There is very clear evidence of its improvement, new features, classes, biomes. The game is expanded, and the evidence of that is clear. But that doesn't mean you have to be happy with it, and there are valid reasons not to be. A scam implies that you're not receiving what you paid for, and from what I've seen, Intrepid Studios have developed an MMO here. It's playable. It works. Hell, I've spent 150 hours in game, and honestly, I enjoyed the majority of my time in Vera. Looking back at their 2017 Kickstarter, much of what has been promised has been realized. An in-world economy, settlements previously called nodes, politics and player building out the world, classes, races, and more still to be added. There is concern the scope of the game is reducing. This, alongside more aggressive monetization strategies, raises red flags, but they have stuck to a commitment that monetization includes no pay-to-win elements, which is still the case. Intrepid have always been open that cosmetics would drive ongoing support for the title, which I imagine would be their argument for the inclusion of a cash shop. But while they're charging more, we've been hearing in recent interviews that the 1.0 release scope is shrinking, with aspects like a second continent, which has been long planned for release, now slipping into post-release territory. I personally don't think that's a death knell to the project, but it's a bit rough to see. Is there reason to question their monetization practices? Absolutely. And personally, I just can't get over that inclusion of the cash shop in alpha. If I'm testing a game to help improve it, then what purpose is the cash shop? If I'm not expected to be playing a game, then I don't expect to be sold shit inside of said testing environment, especially when we all know those resources could have gone to content creation, which further reinforces the narrative that the studio may be facing financial difficulties. Is there reason to be disappointed with how long the game has taken to develop? Yeah, it's a fair complaint. 10 years to create an MMO is really pushing the long end of their development cycle. To be fair to the studio, this is their first title. Hiring talent, onboarding staff, developing implementation plans for those staff, and understanding which pieces need to be completed before you can hire more staff is not a small feat, and simply getting the right staff would have taken months when they were first starting out. But it's a long time, and while some claim Intrepid are dragging their feet, I'd say it's more likely a result of that inexperience early on. In one recent interview, I recall listening to Steven comment on some pitfalls they hit early on in development that did delay them, but with a project this large, I'm not surprised. And despite it all, they are continuing to push towards release with hopes of hitting beta in 2026. I don't believe Ashes has ever been a scam, and I doubt most people are using the word by its specific definition. The term captures a broader view of the studio and game that is shifting toward the negative as players see less than they'd initially hoped. When players call this game a scam, they're likely referencing the monetization, charging for alpha access, the fact that the product is going to release well over expected timeframes, and many aren't happy with Steven's vision for this MMO, which I chalk up to personal preference, which is a valid opinion. My view is that Ashes of Creation still has a chance to succeed, but it's going to be an uphill battle. I personally believe the decision to release onto Steam was a mistake. Whether intended or not, it presents the game in a more complete state than it is, despite its early access label, and all they've done to assure its alpha status is communicated. They will not get another chance at hitting the same market again at 1.0, and much of that Steam release momentum will have faded. One of the great challenges of early access is the ability to maintain a player base through development and maintain some level of hype leading into 1.0. You end up stretching out that player base. Some jump in now, get bored, and don't return, while others wait for 1.0 or beta. If the gains between now and 1.0 aren't massive, will players burn out before they return? I have no doubt a decent number of players will flock to Ashes when it hits 1.0, but I believe they will have burnt out many gamers before it's reached, leading to a lackluster release. My second greater concern is that their transparent communication, while beneficial to some, has burnt out others to the point of toxicity, which often drowns out constructive criticism. And ultimately, the studio are going to have to move mountains or achieve a sudden surge in content generation to maintain a player base that is worth keeping the servers open for. As I've had 150 hours, I feel I've experienced all the game has to offer. Player numbers are beginning to dwindle, which is a problem for a sandbox experience that relies on a healthy player base to continue to move materials around the world. Ultimately, Ashes of Creation is clearly not a scam, but its opportunities for success are shrinking as the game scope does, and as players continue to see poor studio communication, missed deadlines, and aggressive monetization choices. I may have been quite cynical through this video. As a gamer who has seen every major gaming company degrade services and release their own slop, I want Ashes to succeed. I believe Ashes can achieve some success, and decent success for a studio's first release. But the promise of a new MMO to return us to the glory days of the early 2000s seems unlikely. Thanks for checking out this video. I encourage you, if you are interested in this MMO, not to lose hope, to keep up with the dev streams, or simply ignore the title until you start to see news of beta or 1.0. I plan to keep checking back in on this title myself, in the hopes that Intrepid can pull it off and achieve success. That's it from me. If you've enjoyed the video or want to support the channel, you already know how. Hit the like button or sub to see more. But you being here, that's more than enough. Have a good one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.